What if the most peaceful thing on earth isn't a place, but a creature, a living, breathing animal that moves through one of the coldest, darkest places on the planet, and somehow makes it look like home? Tonight, we're going somewhere most people will never go, somewhere quiet, somewhere ancient, somewhere that will slow your heartbeat without even trying. All you have to do is close your eyes and listen. If you want more stories like this one tomorrow night, or hit that subscribe button right now and tap the like button so this reaches someone else who needs a good night's sleep. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. We love knowing who's with us in the dark. Now, let's begin. Somewhere in the Arctic Ocean, right now, as you read this, there is a shape moving beneath the water. It is pale, almost white, glowing softly in the dark water, the way a lantern glows behind frosted glass. It moves without hurry, without noise, without anything that feels like effort. And if you didn't know what it was, you might think you were looking at a ghost. But it isn't a ghost. It is a beluga whale. And it is one of the most quietly extraordinary animals that has ever lived on this planet. The Arctic is not a gentle place. The temperatures drop so low that the sea itself freezes over, forming thick plates of ice that groan and shift with the seasons, while the sky in winter stays dark for months. The wind comes in off the open water with a coldness that feels personal, like it is trying to remind you that you are small. Most of the planet's creatures avoid this place entirely. They migrate south when the cold comes. They find warmth, shelter, easier ground. The beluga does not leave. It chooses this. It has chosen this for millions of years. The ice, the dark, the cold pressure of deep Arctic water. This is not where the beluga survives. This is where the beluga belongs. There is something deeply calming about an animal that has made its peace with the harshest place on Earth and found it beautiful. While we spend so much of our lives looking for somewhere more comfortable, somewhere warmer, somewhere easier, the beluga simply goes deeper. It breathes, it sings, it keeps swimming through the dark without needing the dark to be anything other than what it is. People who study belugas talk about them with a kind of reverence that you don't hear scientists use very often. There is something about this animal that gets under the skin. Maybe it is the color. There are very few white animals in the world, and none quite like this. A fully grown beluga is an almost impossible white, the kind of white that seems to produce its own light in deep water. Watching one move beneath the surface is less like watching an animal, and more like watching the ocean think. Or maybe it is the face. Unlike almost every other whale on Earth, a beluga has something that looks, uncannily, like an expression. The curve of its mouth, the roundness of its forehead, the way it seems to look back at you with a calm, unhurried curiosity, as if it has all the time in the world and is not entirely sure why you seem so rushed. That is the other thing about belugas. The ice itself was singing. Because that is the other thing about belugas, the thing we will come back to again and again tonight. They are almost never silent. Even now, beneath that dark Arctic water, the beluga is making sounds, clicks and calls, and long winding notes that travel through the ocean like slow music. It is singing, and it has been singing for a very, very long time. But before we get to the songs, there is something you need to know about the beluga that most people never think about. Something that starts from the very first moment it is born and changes slowly over years in a way so quiet you would almost miss it entirely. The beluga you just pictured, that pale, glowing shape in the dark water, was not always white. When a beluga calf is born, it arrives into the Arctic water a deep grey-brown colour, sometimes almost charcoal. It looks nothing like its mother. If you saw one without knowing what it was, you might not even recognise it as the same species. It is small, dark, and utterly dependent on the warmth of the animal swimming beside it. Over the first few years of its life, something slow happens. The grey begins to lighten. Patches of cream appear, then spread. By the time a beluga reaches its teens, the brown is almost entirely gone, replaced by a blue-grey that continues to pale with every passing year. Full adulthood brings the white that the species is known for, that luminous, sourceless white that makes them look like they were carved from sea ice. The entire process takes roughly 7 to 12 years. Think about that for a moment. 7 to 12 years of gradual, quiet change. No dramatic moment, no single morning where the beluga wakes up and is suddenly different. Just a slow, patient becoming, season after season, dive after dive, until the animal that was once dark has become light. There is something in that worth sitting with tonight. We live in a world that is obsessed with fast transformation. Before and after photos taken weeks apart. Life-changing moments. Overnight success. The dramatic turn. But the beluga's transformation doesn't work like that, and the ocean doesn't rush it. The change happens beneath the surface, slowly, so on a timeline that has nothing to do with urgency, and everything to do with time simply being allowed to pass. Scientists believe the colour change is tied to the maturation of the beluga's skin cells, the same cells that will eventually help regulate the whale's temperature in near freezing water. The whiteness is not decorative, it is functional. In a world of white ice and pale Arctic light, a white beluga is nearly invisible from above, which matters when the ocean has other large predators moving through it. But here is what stays with you when you learn about this. The beluga's mother is already white. She was once dark too. She made this journey before her calf was born, and now she swims beside a small grey animal, knowing, in whatever way a whale can know anything, that the white is already coming, that the animal beside her will one day look like she does, that all it takes is time. And there are beluga populations in which older females have been observed staying close to calves that are not their own, guiding them, slowing for them, swimming in patterns that keep the young ones safe at the edge of the pod, the white ones looking after the dark ones. Experience surrounding inexperience, the already transformed making space for those still mid-becoming. The calves, for their part, seem to understand something important. They stay close. They match the pace of the adults, and they don't rush ahead into water they don't yet know. They are patient in the way that only very young things can be. Not because they have chosen patience, but because the world around them is simply larger and older, and moving at a rhythm they haven't yet learned to push against. The Arctic moves slowly in winter. Ice forms over weeks. Snow settles in layers so gradual that you can press your hand into it and feel the different seasons stacked underneath, each one compacted by the weight of what came after. Everything in this environment teaches the same lesson. Slow is not a weakness. Slow is how things last. The beluga learns this from the very beginning, from its first breath of Arctic air to its first solo dive into water, so cold it would stop a human heart in minutes. It learns to take its time, to trust the process of becoming, to stay close to those who have already made the journey. By the time it is fully white, it will have spent years practicing a patience that most creatures never learn at all. And somewhere in that slow, quiet transformation, it will have become exactly what it was always meant to be. Long before scientists had the equipment to record what was happening beneath Arctic water, sailors knew something strange was going on. They would anchor their ships in northern bays and hear it through the hull. A high, clear sound, not the deep groaning of ice, not the flat percussion of waves, and something almost musical. Something that rang through the wooden planks of the ship like a choir performing in the room below. Some sailors thought it was the ocean playing tricks. Others thought it was the wind finding gaps in the ice. A few, the more honest ones, said it sounded like birds. They were not entirely wrong. The beluga whale has one of the most complex and varied vocal ranges of any animal on Earth. Where most whales produce a narrow range of low-frequency sounds, deep resonant pulses, high bright calls, deep resonant pulses, high bright calls that cut through cold water for miles, chirps, squeaks, melodic warbles that have no obvious name because no one expected a whale to make them. Early Arctic explorers, hearing these sounds rising through the water and vibrating up through the wood of their ships, gave the beluga a nickname that has lasted centuries. They called it the canary of the sea. It is a good name. It captures something true about this animal, but it also undersells it. A canary has one song. A beluga has hundreds. It improvises. It mimics. It responds. It listens and answers. The soundscape of a beluga pod is not background noise. It is conversation. The clicks serve a specific and remarkable purpose. Belugas are echolocating animals. Echo tells the beluga the size, distance. Echo tells the beluga the size, distance, texture, and movement of whatever is out there. A fish, a patch of ice, another whale, a current change. They are essentially seeing with sound. In water, where visibility is near zero, in the darkness under Arctic ice, the beluga builds a complete and detailed picture of its world purely through listening. And this is not passive hearing. It is active, precise, and deeply intelligent. The beluga's brain processes these returning echoes in real time, assembling them into something like a three-dimensional map of its surroundings. It knows where it is because it has listened carefully to everything around it. The whistles are different. These are the social calls, the ones that carry between individuals across long distances. Belugas recognize each other's whistles. They have been observed calling specifically to individuals, adjusting their calls depending on who they are talking to. Young belugas develop their own distinct calls early in life and keep them the way a person keeps their voice as they grow. The call becomes a kind of name. There is a moment, often described by researchers lucky enough to be in the water near a beluga pod, that is genuinely hard to put into words. You are surrounded by this sound. It is coming from every direction. It moves through the water and into your body. You feel it in your chest, in your jaw. and the whales are looking at you while they do it, their small eyes watching, their expressions unhurried, their voices filling the cold water around you with something that feels beyond any reasonable scientific explanation, like warmth. The ocean is full of sound, waves, currents, the deep mechanical hum of tectonic plates grinding slowly against each other, miles below. But the beluga's voice sits above all of it, clear and immediate, and distinctly alive. It is the sound of an intelligence that has been communicating, uninterrupted, for millions of years. The sailors who heard it through the wood of their ships didn't have the science to understand what they were listening to, but they recognized it for what it was. Something alive, something social, something that had things to say. They just didn't know yet that some of those songs were older than their ships, older than their countries, older than almost anything human beings had ever built or spoken or sung. If you look at a beluga head-on, the first thing you notice, before the eyes, before the expression, is the forehead. It is large, rounded, and strangely soft-looking. It sits above the beluga's face like a smooth dome, giving the whole animal a quality that is hard to name but easy to feel. Wise, maybe, patient, like something that has spent a very long time thinking. That structure has a name. It is called the melon, and it is one of the most sophisticated biological tools in the entire animal kingdom. The melon is not bone. It is a mass of specialized fatty tissue, honeycombed with channels and pockets of different densities. It sits just in front of the skull, behind the beluga's face, and its entire purpose is to focus sound. When the beluga produces echolocation clicks in its nasal passages, those sounds travel forward through the melon, which shapes and directs them into a focused beam. The melon works like a lens, gathering scattered sound energy and narrowing it into something precise and directed, the way a magnifying glass gathers scattered light into a single bright point. What makes it extraordinary is that the beluga can control it. As the whale changes the sounds it produces, the melon physically changes shape. The muscles and tissue surrounding it shift and flex, adjusting the density and contour of the structure in real time. The beluga is essentially retuning its own forehead mid-conversation. It is changing the shape of the tool while the tool is in use. No engineer has built anything quite like it. Researchers studying beluga echolocation have found that belugas can narrow or widen the beam of their clicks depending on what they are trying to find. Searching for fish across a wide area requires a broad beam. Identifying a specific object at close range requires a narrow, concentrated one. The beluga makes these adjustments automatically, fluidly, the way a skilled musician adjusts their breath and lips to change the tone of a note without thinking about the mechanics of doing it. But the melon does more than echolocate. It also plays a role in social communication. When belugas interact with each other, when the whistles and chirps from the previous chapter fill the water around a pod, the melon is part of how those sounds are shaped and projected. Two belugas facing each other in conversation are not just making noise at each other. They are directing sound with precision, pointing it. The melon gives the beluga a kind of acoustic aim that most animals simply do not have. This is part of why encounters with belugas feel so different from encounters with other large animals. When a beluga turns toward you and seems to look at you, it is not only looking, it is also, almost certainly, listening to the echo that comes back from your body. It is building a picture of you. It knows your size, the density of your bones compared to your soft tissue, the air in your lungs, the shape of your skull. In the few seconds that it faces you, it learns more about your physical structure than most doctors could determine without equipment. And it does all of this with its forehead. There is a gentleness to how belugas use this ability. They are not aggressive in their curiosity. Researchers have noted that belugas investigating unfamiliar objects or animals tend to approach slowly at an angle, making small adjustments as the returning echoes sharpen their picture. They take their time. They don't rush the knowing. They approach the world the way a careful reader approaches a difficult sentence, slowly, with attention, trusting that meaning will come if they stay with it long enough. The melon shifts and settles as the beluga moves. From the outside, you see only the smooth curve of the forehead, unchanging in appearance, even as it works constantly beneath the surface. It is quietly extraordinary, a thinking, adjusting, listening structure that the animal carries at the front of its face wherever it goes. Every creature that uses its senses fully, that pays close attention to the world around it, carries something like this, a part of itself that is tuned outward, shaped for reception, built to understand before it acts. The beluga just wears it more visibly than most. Most whales cannot turn their heads. This is easy to overlook when you are not thinking about it, but the moment you do, it becomes a strange and slightly unsettling fact. The largest animals in the ocean, animals that can live for a century, that cross entire oceans, that sing songs complex enough to rival human music, are permanently looking forward. Their vertebrae are fused. Their heads and bodies move as one. To look sideways, they turn their whole body. To look behind them, they have to loop around entirely. The beluga is different. Unlike every large whale in the ocean, the beluga has unfused cervical vertebrae. Its neck bones are separate, mobile, functional. This means the beluga can move its head independently of its body. It can turn to look at something beside it. It can tilt its head upward toward the surface of the ice. It can look down, sideways, slightly back. The full range of motion is not enormous, but compared to any other whale alive, it is remarkable. Or what this means in practice is something that takes most people by surprise the first time they see it. When a beluga notices you, it turns to look at you, not its whole body, just its head, with something that feels unmistakably like attention. That single movement changes everything about the encounter. There is a reason that humans feel seen by beluga whales in a way they don't always feel seen by other ocean animals. Eye contact, or something close to it, carries enormous weight for social species. When something turns to look directly at you, it signals awareness, acknowledgement, the possibility of a relationship, however brief. Every social species on Earth understands this signal on a level deeper than thought. It is built into us. When a beluga turns its head and meets your gaze, something in the brain responds. Something old and wordless that says, "This thing knows I am here." Beluga calves, in the early weeks of their lives, have been observed doing something that researchers find particularly striking. They watch, constantly and carefully. Their heads turning to follow movement, to locate sound, to track the position of their mothers in the pod. Where other whale calves must orient their whole bodies to gather visual information, the beluga calf can simply look. It is quietly building a picture of its world from a very early age, and the mobile neck is the tool that makes this possible, and as the ability to turn the head is also practically useful in ways beyond social interaction. When a beluga is navigating under ice, a complex three-dimensional environment that shifts and changes, being able to look upward toward the ice ceiling helps locate breathing holes. Being able to glance sideways while moving helps track companions without slowing down. Small advantages in a high-pressure environment can be the difference between making it and not. So the neck mobility that makes belugas seem personable is the same feature that makes them exceptional Arctic survivors. But it is the social dimension that stays with you. Scientists who have spent extended time with beluga pods in the wild often describe a particular quality of awareness that the animals seem to maintain about each other. They know where each member of the pod is. They adjust their movements to maintain proximity. They check on each other, and because they can turn their heads, are still together. For animals that live are still together. For animals that live in an environment where visibility is often near zero, where ice and dark water can separate a pod in seconds, this kind of awareness is not sentimental. It is survival. Knowing where the others are is how you stay alive. They crush you, old enough to be your crush you, old enough to be your grandparent, living in conditions that would kill you within minutes, turning its head to look at you with an expression that carries, somehow, no threat at all. Just curiosity, just presence, just the quiet acknowledgement that you are here. And so is it. And for this moment, the ocean has made you neighbours. Before a beluga dives, it breathes. Not the shallow, automatic breathing that most animals do without thinking. A full, deliberate breath. The blowhole opens, the old air rushes out in a visible plume above the surface. And then fresh air floods in. The beluga holds it, and then it goes under. What happens next, inside that animal's body, is one of the quieter miracles of the natural world. The moment the beluga submerges, or its body begins a controlled shutdown. Not a panicked, struggling response to being deprived of air. A calm, practiced sequence that the animal was born knowing. The heart rate slows. In deep dives, it can drop from around 100 beats per minute at the surface to fewer than 10 at depth. The blood vessels in non-essential areas of the body, the fins, the outer tissue, begin to constrict, redirecting oxygen-rich blood away from the periphery and toward the places that cannot survive without it. The heart, the brain, the body decides what matters most and protects it. The lungs, which you might expect to be the critical component in all of this, are actually compressed almost entirely flat under the pressure of deep water. The beluga does not rely on its lungs during a dive the way we might imagine. Instead, oxygen is stored in the muscle tissue itself, bound to a protein called myoglobin that holds onto it the way a sponge holds water. And this is why beluga muscle is darker than you would expect. The higher the myoglobin concentration, the darker the tissue. The colour of the meat is the colour of stored breath. A beluga can hold a dive for up to 25 minutes. It can descend to depths of around 700 meters, though most foraging dives are shallower. And throughout all of this, there is no panic, no urgency. The body simply operates on what it has stored, doing what it was designed to do. And the whale moves through the dark water with the same unhurried efficiency as always. There is something about this that is hard not to apply to your own body tonight. The way the beluga manages a dive is not unlike what happens to the human body as it enters deep sleep. The heart slows, breathing becomes shallow and regular, blood pressure drops. The brain, deprived of the constant input it processes during the day, begins to sort and consolidate, filing away what is useful and releasing what is not. Non-essential systems quiet down. Essential ones continue, steady and reliable, in the background. Sleep is not a failure of consciousness. It is a managed descent. The body deciding what to hold on to and what to let go. Choosing the heart, choosing the brain, trusting that the surface will still be there when it is time to come back up. The beluga does not resist the dive. It does not hover anxiously at the surface, rehearsing what it will do when it gets deep. It has done this thousands of times. The water has never failed to hold it. The oxygen stored in its muscles has always been enough. At some point, very early in its life, it learned to trust the dive. And since then, going under has not been frightening. It has been ordinary. It has been, in its way, restful. Researchers studying beluga sleep have found that the animals do rest, but they almost never go fully unconscious the way land mammals do. One hemisphere of the brain stays active while the other rests. Then they switch. This means the beluga is never entirely unaware of its surroundings, never entirely off. It rests in the middle of the world, not apart from it. It stays connected to the water even in its deepest rest, but the body still slows. The movements still gentle. The calls become fewer, quieter, further apart, and the pod moves together in slow, patient circles near the surface, the white shapes turning in the dark water like a single thought that has learned to rest without disappearing. The breath goes out. The body knows what to do. The water holds the whale. And somewhere in the quiet below the surface, something ancient and alive lets itself be still. The beluga does not travel alone. This is not an incidental fact about the species. It is central to everything the beluga is. How it survives, how it learns, how it navigates, so how it raises its young, how it processes the world. The beluga is, at its core, a social animal, and the group it forms with others of its kind is not a loose collection of individuals who happen to be heading in the same direction. It is something that functions, in many ways, like a family. Beluga pods vary in size. A small group might be 3 or 4 animals. During seasonal migrations, all pods merge into gatherings of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of belugas moving together through the same waterways, producing a sound that travelers have described as audible from miles away. But within these larger gatherings, the tighter social units remain intact. The small, close groups who know each other, the ones who have been swimming together for years. These core pods are often built around older females. This is worth pausing on. In beluga society, as in many of the most socially complex animal species on Earth, age is not a disadvantage. An older female beluga carries something that no younger animal possesses: decades of accumulated knowledge. She knows which migration routes are reliable and which have shifted. She knows where the fish gather at different times of year, She has survived multiple harsh winters and can recognize the early signs of conditions that younger animals have never encountered. She is, in the truest sense, in the memory of the group. There is a parallel here with elephant society, which researchers often point to when discussing beluga social structure. In both species, the matriarch's knowledge is not passive. It is actively accessed by the group. When conditions change or a threat appears, animals in the pod orient toward the most experienced individual. They follow, they trust. The oldest ones hold the map. Beluga calves are born into this structure and immediately surrounded by it, and their mother is close, of course, nursing, guiding, vocalizing constantly in the low tones that researchers believe function as the primary bonding channel between mother and calf. But the wider pod is also present. Other adults, often other females, moving nearby, maintaining a loose protective formation around the young animal. The calf does not experience early life as a two-animal world of mother and child. It experiences it as community. This has practical consequences that last a lifetime. Beluga calves that grow up in stable, socially rich pods show better navigation, better foraging success, and longer survival rates than animals raised in disrupted social environments. The relationships are not just comforting, they are educational. Every interaction with an older animal is a lesson. Every migration followed is a route memorized. Every challenge survived in the company of experienced adults is knowledge deposited into the calf's growing understanding of the world. The bonds within a beluga pod hold up over time in ways that are still being studied. Animals have been observed returning to the same individuals year after year across migrations that span thousands of miles. Reunions in summer estuaries, areas where pods gather to molt and socialize, appear to involve specific, directed interactions between animals who know each other. The greetings are physical. Belugas press alongside each other, rub against each other, vocalize in close proximity in what looks, to any honest observer, very much like affection. It would be easy to project human emotions onto this and be told you are being unscientific. But it would also be dishonest to watch two belugas who have not seen each other for months reunite in a shallow estuary, press their bodies together, and fill the water with sound, and call it something cold and mechanical. The beluga needs the pod the way the pod needs each member. No single animal is the whole, but without any single animal, the whole is less than it was. The knowledge thins, the roots become less certain, the songs have one fewer voice. This is what a family is. Not the people you share blood with by accident, but the ones whose absence makes the world slightly quieter, the ones whose presence makes the dark water navigable. The beluga has always known this. Every beluga calf is born into a world already full of sound, the clicks and whistles of its mother, the calls of the wider pod moving around it, the deep, textured hum of the Arctic Ocean itself, currents and ice and pressure and depth, all producing a constant, layered soundscape that the calf begins processing from its very first moments of life. Sound is not something the beluga encounters. It is something the beluga is born inside of, and very early on it begins to learn. The songs a beluga sings are not instinct. They are not preloaded into the animal at birth, the way the basic calls of many species are. Beluga vocalizations are learned. The calf listens to the sounds around it, particularly to its mother, and over time begins to produce its own versions. Imperfect at first, gradually refined and shaped by repetition and response, and the subtle feedback of the social group it is surrounded by. Researchers studying beluga vocal learning describe a process that is surprisingly similar to how a human infant learns to speak. The calf babbles. It experiments with sounds that don't yet carry meaning. It listens to how adults respond or don't respond and adjusts. Slowly, over months and years, the vocalizations become more complex, more precise, more socially functional, and the calf develops its own distinct vocal signature, a call that identifies it, that says, "Here I am," that other members of the pod learn to recognize. But it also inherits. The specific repertoire of calls used by a beluga pod is not random, it is shared. Animals within the same social group use the same calls, the same patterns, the same variations. This repertoire is passed from the older animals to the younger ones through the same process of listening and imitation. A calf raised in one pod will develop a different vocal style than a calf raised in a different pod, even if the two pods live in the same ocean. The songs are local, cultural, specific to the group, and here is where it becomes something close to extraordinary. Some of these songs are old, when a pod has been intact for many generations. When the older females have passed their calls to their daughters, who have passed them to their daughters, for decades or centuries without interruption. What the youngest calf is learning to sing is not a new song. It is an old one, ancient in some cases, a vocal pattern that has been carried forward through the water, calf to adult to calf again, for longer than most human institutions have existed. We do not know how far back this inheritance goes. The ocean does not keep recordings, but we know that some beluga populations have occupied the same Arctic waters for thousands of years, maintaining the same migration routes, gathering at the same seasonal sites, socializing in the same shallow estuaries. If the songs travel with the population, and the population has been continuous, then the songs have been continuous too. What a beluga sings today, in the cold water of the Arctic, may carry the acoustic memory of animals that died before your great-great-grandmother was born. This is a kind of cultural transmission that humans rarely credit to non-human animals. We are comfortable with the idea that our own music carries history, that a folk song preserves a way of life, that a lullaby passes a mother's presence into the next generation, that the right melody can reach through time and make the past feel present. We find this beautiful, and rightly so, but the beluga has been doing this without writing, without instruments, without any technology at all, using only breath and water and the patient attention of a calf listening to its mother in the dark. Tonight, somewhere in the Arctic, a calf is learning a song its mother knows by heart, the way her mother knew it before her. It does not know the song is old. It only knows it is what the animals around it sound like. It only knows that when it sings it correctly, the pod responds, that the sound it makes belongs here, belongs with these animals. It belongs to this cold and ancient stretch of water. It does not need to understand the history, it just needs to sing. And so it does, quietly, carefully, getting closer to the melody each time, just like it was shown. There is a place in the Canadian Arctic where the water turns shallow in summer, and the riverbed is covered in a fine, clean gravel. Every year, belugas come here. They have been coming here for as long as anyone has been observing them, and almost certainly for much longer than that. They swim into the shallow water so shallow that their backs break the surface, and they rub themselves against the gravel bottom, slowly, deliberately, rolling slightly to reach different patches, pressing the length of their bodies against the stones below. Scientists call this behavior molting. The belugas are shedding the outer layer of their skin, which becomes loose and yellowish by summer's end. The rubbing against gravel helps slough it off, revealing the fresh, bright white skin underneath. Physiologically, it is a maintenance behavior, practical and purposeful. But watch the animals doing it for more than a few minutes, and the word that comes to mind is not maintenance. It is joy. Belugas in molting estuaries are not serious. They are not efficient. They roll and twist and linger. They bump against each other, vocalize constantly, gnaw and return to the same patches of gravel again and again, long after any practical need for rubbing has been met. Young animals barrel through the shallows with what appears to be pure physical excitement. Older animals move more slowly, but no less enthusiastically. The sounds coming from a molting aggregation are different from the sounds of a pod on the move. Brighter, more varied, with a quality that researchers describe, somewhat cautiously, as celebratory. It is play, or something close enough to play that the distinction may not matter. The capacity for play is one of the markers scientists use to identify complex intelligence in animals. Play is cognitively expensive. It requires memory, anticipation, the ability to signal this is not serious, so that social partners don't misread the interaction. Animals that play are, almost by definition, animals capable of more than mere survival. They have mental space beyond what the immediate moment demands. They can imagine. Belugas play their whole lives. Juveniles engage in the most vigorous and obvious play, chasing each other, interacting with floating objects, practicing movement patterns that have no apparent function other than the doing of them. But adult belugas continue to engage in social play well into maturity, something that is rare among large mammals and speaks to a social culture that values interaction for its own sake, not just as a means to an end. And they return to the same beaches their mothers returned to. This is the detail that adds a layer of meaning to the molting behavior that purely mechanical descriptions miss. Belugas are not going to just any shallow gravel estuary. They are going to specific ones, the same ones their family has used, the same stones, the same water chemistry, the same seasonal light. The choice of where to molt is not random, and it is not solely about the quality of the gravel. It is about familiarity, a memory, return. There is a word for the pull that brings a creature back to a specific place that holds its history. Humans use it to describe the feeling of returning to a childhood home, a landscape where something important happened, a place that shaped who we are. We call it belonging. The beluga swims back to its mother's estuary the way a person walks back into the house they grew up in. Something in the body recognizes the place before the conscious mind has finished identifying it. Slow, deliberate, pleasurable. The old. Slow, deliberate, pleasurable. The old skin loosens and falls away. The new white skin underneath catches the Arctic light. The calls fill the shallow water. Animals who have spent months in open ocean, covering thousands of miles, press their bodies against familiar stones. The journey out was long, as the water was dark and cold and full of uncertainty. But the beach was always here, unchanged, holding the memory of every summer the pod has ever spent in its shallows. Coming home, it turns out, is also a kind of renewal. When winter comes to the Arctic, the ocean does something no other ocean does quite so completely. It seals itself. The surface cools past the point where water can remain liquid and begins to form ice. It starts at the edges, thin, transparent sheets that flex with the swell beneath them. Then it thickens. Layer by layer over weeks, the ice grows downward into the water, extending its reach, locking the surface of the ocean into a ceiling of frozen white that can stretch for thousands of miles without interruption. Seen from above, it looks like a landscape, flat, windswept, featureless. Seen from below, it looks like the underside of a world. The beluga lives in the space between the ice ceiling and the dark water below it. For most animals, a sealed ocean would represent a death sentence. No air, no surface, no escape. But the beluga has spent millions of years developing a relationship with Arctic ice that turns what looks like a trap into something more like a home. It knows this environment. It knows it with the accumulated knowledge of a species that has been navigating it since before the last ice age ended. The ice is not a threat. It is a landscape the beluga reads as fluently as we read a street we have walked 1,000 times. Locating breathing holes is the critical skill. Under an ice field, air exists only where cracks and fractures in the ice allow the water to meet the surface. These openings shift as the ice expands and contracts with temperature changes and tidal movement. A breathing hole that existed this morning may have closed by afternoon. A new one may have opened elsewhere. As the ice is not a static ceiling, it is a constantly changing puzzle, and the beluga has to solve it continuously, in the dark, every few minutes throughout its life. It solves it with sound. The echolocation that we explored earlier, the clicking and listening, the melon shaping the beam, the returning echoes painting a picture of the surrounding environment, is precisely the tool needed to navigate under ice. The beluga can tell the difference between the echo that returns from solid ice and the echo that returns from open water. It can detect the thinning of ice that signals a potential breathing hole. It can identify the direction of open water from the quality of sound traveling through the water column. In total darkness, under thousands of square miles of frozen ocean, the beluga builds a precise and constantly updated map of where the air is. This is not done with panic. It is done with the calm, practiced attention of an animal, doing something it has always known how to do. There is also memory involved. Belugas return to the same Arctic regions year after year, and show familiarity with the specific geography of those regions, including areas where reliable breathing holes tend to form due to tidal currents, wind patterns, or geological features of the seabed below. The older animals in a pod carry the most detailed versions of this knowledge. They remember where the ice tends to thin first in spring. They know which channels are likely to stay open longest into winter. The map in their minds is built from years of seasons, layered one over another, getting richer and more detailed over time. For the calves swimming below the ice for their first winter, all of this is new and enormous. The world above them has changed into something hard and white and vast. The light has dimmed to near nothing. The ocean looks different, are water and bouncing off the ice ceiling. Water and bouncing off the ice ceiling, filling the under-ice world with familiar voices. And gradually, over the weeks of that first winter, the calf learns to read the ice the way its mother reads it, to listen for the texture of the echoes, to follow the older animals toward air, to trust that the ceiling above it, so as solid and sealed as it appears, always has an opening somewhere, that the world above has not closed entirely, that if you listen carefully enough, you will always find the way through. This is what the Arctic teaches. Not that the world is easy or warm or welcoming, but that it can be navigated, that darkness and cold and sealed surfaces are not the end of the story, that you have what you need if you are willing to be still enough to use it. The beluga knows this in its body, and so, toward the sun in spring, the Arctic warms toward the sun in spring. The Arctic warms by degrees so small, you would need instruments to measure them day to day. But the beluga feels it, not as a thought, not as a decision made and weighed against alternatives. It feels it the way you feel the first genuine warmth of a spring morning through a window. Before your mind has named it, your body has already responded. Something shifts, and the beluga begins to move. Beluga migration is one of the most consistent and punctual events in the natural world. The same populations travel the same routes at roughly the same time each year, moving from their winter range in deeper offshore waters toward the shallow coastal estuaries where they will spend the summer. The distances involved are staggering. Some populations travel more than 1,000 miles each way, and the journey takes weeks. And yet, the animals arrive at their summer destinations within the same narrow window of days, year after year, with a reliability that has allowed indigenous Arctic communities to plan around their arrival for thousands of years. What drives this timing is not external. It is internal. The beluga carries a biological clock that is calibrated to the Arctic year with extraordinary precision, such the changing ratio of daylight to darkness as the seasons turn triggers hormonal shifts in the animal's body that initiate the urge to move. The lengthening days of late winter are not just a change in light. For the beluga, they are a signal as clear and urgent as an alarm. The body knows what the lengthening light means. It has known this for millions of years. But the clock is not rigid. It is responsive. Belugas in years with unusual ice conditions or atypical water temperatures show flexibility in their timing and routes. The internal clock sets the general season, but the animal reads its environment continuously and adjusts. It is not following a program blindly. It is following a deep inclination, guided by instinct and experience, and the accumulated knowledge of the pod, while staying alert to what the world around it is actually doing. The migration itself is not a frantic event. There is no race, no competition for position, and the pod moves together at a pace that the youngest and slowest members can maintain. They travel near the surface, vocalizing regularly, the calls serving to keep the group cohesive as they move through water that is changing around them, warming slightly, becoming shallower, carrying different smells and sounds than the deep winter range. For the calves born the previous summer, This is their first migration. Everything about it is new. The changing seabed below, the unfamiliar coastlines, and the water warming degree by degree as they move south and east toward the estuaries. But the older animals have done this many times. Their movement is unhurried and certain, the kind of certainty that only comes from having made a journey so many times that the body remembers the way before the mind does. There is a quality to long migration that is meditative in its own right. The same motion, repeated, the same sounds around you, the same companions. The destination getting closer, not because you are rushing toward it, but because you have been moving steadily in its direction for a long time. Progress without urgency, arrival without drama. The beluga does not think about how far it has come or how far remains. It swims the mile it is in. The next mile will be swum when it arrives. The estuary will appear when the estuary appears, as it has every other year, as it will appear every year that this pod continues to exist. On the clock says it is time to go. The body says here is how to move. The pod says we are going together. And so the white shapes turn toward summer, reading the light, following the ancient pull of the calendar in their blood. Not rushing, never rushing, just moving. The beluga is not a dramatic hunter. There are no high-speed chases, no explosive bursts of violence, no moment of spectacle that you could cut into a highlight reel and play for an audience looking for excitement. The beluga hunts the way it does everything else, with patience, with attention, and with a calm confidence in its own abilities that makes the whole process look almost effortless. Its diet is broad. Fish form the core of it. Arctic cod, salmon, caplin, herring, and various other species, depending on the season and location. But the beluga also eats squid, octopus, crabs, shrimp, and various bottom-dwelling invertebrates. It is an opportunistic feeder, and which means it eats what is available and abundant, rather than fixating on a single prey type. This flexibility has served the species well across the dramatic seasonal shifts of the Arctic environment, where one food source might be plentiful in summer and entirely absent by winter. The mechanics of catching prey involve that sophisticated echolocation we have already met. The beluga uses its clicking system to locate fish in water where visibility may be negligible, under ice, in murky river estuaries, in the dark of deep water. It identifies the size and movement of potential prey from a distance, then moves toward it with the same unhurried efficiency it brings to everything. The final approach is slow and precise. The mouth opens. The prey is drawn in by suction as much as by any active grab. It is over quietly. What is remarkable about beluga foraging is not the hunting itself, but the waiting around it. Or belugas spend a significant portion of their lives simply moving through water that does not currently contain what they are looking for, in a state that is not quite rest and not quite searching. A kind of alert patience. They are paying attention to their environment, the echoes coming back, the currents carrying scent and temperature changes, without expending energy in directed pursuit. They are available to what the ocean offers, without demanding that the ocean offer it immediately. This is not passive. It requires a particular kind of discipline that is, in the context of modern human life, almost countercultural. The beluga does not try to manufacture the conditions it needs. It cannot. The fish are where they are. The currents move on their own schedule. The most efficient thing an animal can do in an environment it cannot control is to move through it steadily, stay receptive, and trust that the ocean will provide what it reliably has always provided, if you are patient enough to be there when it does. Beluga foraging dives can last up to 25 minutes, and a single animal may make dozens of dives in a day. Much of what happens during those dives yields nothing. The animal returns to the surface, breathes, and goes back down. The ratio of effort to reward in any given hour would look, by human productivity standards, quite poor. But this is the wrong frame. The beluga is not measuring its day in successful catches per hour. It is living in a rhythm of movement and rest, descent and surface, search and pause, that adds up over weeks and months to a well-fed, healthy animal. The patience is the strategy. There is something in this that land-dwelling animals, including humans, have largely unlearned. The idea that not immediately having what you need is not a crisis, and that moving through an environment that hasn't yet yielded what you're looking for is not failure. That the correct response to scarcity in this moment is not panic or aggression, but continued calm movement. Because the ocean is large, and this moment is not the whole story. The beluga surfaces again. It breathes. Its melon tilts slightly toward the water below. Somewhere under the surface, something is moving. It goes back down, so there are places in the Arctic where the same belugas have been returning for longer than any living person can remember. The estuary of the St. Lawrence River in eastern Canada, the shallow bays of the Mackenzie Delta, the waters around Svalbard, the summer gathering grounds of Hudson Bay. These are not just locations on a map. They are places with histories, specific, documented, long histories of the same populations arriving in the same season, using the same areas, giving birth in the same shallow, warm water zones that their grandmothers and great-grandmothers used before them. Some of these sites have been used continuously for thousands of years. We know this because indigenous Arctic communities have records of beluga presence at specific locations, going back through oral history across many generations, and because archaeological evidence of beluga hunting at certain sites stretches back further still. We shaped the human geography of the Arctic, as much as the other way around. What brings them back is something that researchers are still working to fully understand. Part of it is the same biological clock that drives the migration. Part of it is the pull of environmental cues, the water temperature, the salinity, the particular quality of light in a familiar bay. But a significant part of it appears to be memory, social memory. The older animals in the pod know this place. They have been here before. They lead the way, not because a compass in their body points here, but because they remember it. This is most clearly demonstrated in the birthing behavior of beluga females. A female beluga returns to give birth in the same area where she was born. And this fidelity to birth site is not unique among marine mammals, but in belugas it is particularly strong and well documented. The returning female is not just following a general preference for shallow, warm water. She is returning to a specific place, a place she experienced as a newborn and has carried in her body ever since. Think about that for a moment. The first place you ever existed in the world. the first water you breathed against, the first temperature, the first light, the first sounds. The beluga holds all of this in a memory so durable that decades later, after thousands of miles of migration, after years at sea in open Arctic water, she returns to give her own calf its first experience of the world, in the same place she had hers. There is an intergenerational continuity in this that is almost architectural. The estuaries are not just geography, they are inherited places, passed from mother to daughter through the act of being born there and then returning. And the knowledge of the place is written into the body by experience, and the body carries it forward. No maps, no instructions, just the indelible record of where life began. Researchers have identified specific female belugas returning to the same estuary for over 20 consecutive years. The same animal, the same bay, the same general area of shallow water, every summer, carrying calves on some of those returns, bringing her young to the place her mother brought her. The line of return going back further than the observation records. There are human traditions that work the same way. Families who return to the same lake every summer. Communities who gather at the same festival, in the same square, for reasons that have long outlived the original occasion. The return becomes the reason. The place holds something that the body recognizes as home, even when the logical mind cannot fully articulate why. For the beluga, it is simpler and more complete than that. Sauk the place was the first safe thing, the warmest water in a cold world, the first sounds that were familiar, the place where its mother was calm. Of course it comes back. Of course it always comes back. The ocean is enormous, but some places in it are home. Most people, when they imagine cold places, imagine grey. Grey water, grey sky, grey ice stretching to the horizon with a flat and featureless uniformity that the brain files under bleak and moves on from. Since cold places do not have a reputation for beauty. They have a reputation for hardship, for emptiness, for the kind of landscape that survival literature is written about. We imagine the Arctic, and we imagine survival, not wonder. People who have actually been there describe something very different. The Arctic light is unlike light anywhere else on Earth. In summer, the sun does not set for weeks at a time, and it hangs low on the horizon at all hours, casting everything in a long, angled gold that photographers travel thousands of miles to capture. In winter, the darkness is broken by the aurora, green and violet and white curtains of light that move across the sky in slow waves, reflecting off the ice below in colours that have no equivalent in the temperate world. In the transition seasons, spring and autumn, the light changes so rapidly and so dramatically from hour to hour that the same landscape can look like 5 different paintings in a single afternoon. And through all of it moves the beluga, white against the deep blue of Arctic water, white against the pale jade green of a shallow estuary, white in the blue-black water under the ice, lit by whatever thin light makes it through from above, glowing with a soft luminescence that sailors have been remarking on for centuries. The white of the beluga is not incidental to this environment. It was shaped by it. Over millions of years of evolution in a world of white ice and pale light, the beluga's coloration became a form of camouflage, a way of moving through this particular landscape without standing out against it. The whiteness is a response to the environment, a conversation between the animal and the world that made it. But white in Arctic water is not simply white. Water changes colour with depth and light. A beluga seen near the surface in direct sunlight is a bright, hard white, almost reflective, like fresh snow. The same animal seen from below, in deeper water, lit only by filtered surface light, glows with a blue-tinged luminescence that seems to come from inside the animal, rather than from any external source. Divers who've encountered belugas in clear Arctic water describe the experience of watching them approach from depth, growing from a soft blue glow in the darkness below into a fully formed, quietly radiant animal arriving at the surface without haste. It is, by every account, one of the most beautiful things you can witness in the natural world. Cold places produce this kind of beauty because cold places are also clear places. The Arctic Ocean, particularly in winter, is among the clearest water on Earth. There is less biological matter suspended in it, fewer particles clouding the water column. Light travels further. Colours stay true at depth. What you see in front of you is not filtered and muddied by the warmth and biological richness that makes tropical waters green and opaque at the edges. The Arctic strips everything back, and in that clarity, the beluga moves with a visibility and a precision of form that warmer, cloudier waters would obscure. Cold also slows things down. The pace of life in the Arctic, the movement of the water, the growth of organisms, and the cycles of feeding and resting operates on a slower clock than the tropics. The beluga's unhurried movement is partly personality and partly physics. Cold water is denser than warm water. It resists sudden movement. The environment itself encourages the beluga's particular quality of measured, deliberate grace. It is a strange equation, the harshest environment on Earth producing some of its most quietly beautiful animals and light. And as if the world decided that the places it made most difficult to inhabit should also be the most breathtaking. A kind of compensation, or a kind of honesty. Beauty and hardship being not opposites, but companions, appearing together because they come from the same source. The cold makes everything harder. The cold also makes everything clearer. The beluga is white because of where it lives, and where it lives is extraordinary because of how it looks. The animal and the landscape made each other. You have been slowing down for a while now. Perhaps you have noticed it. The thoughts are less sharp than they were an hour ago. The things that felt urgent earlier in the day have quieted. The body has been releasing tension in small increments, bit by bit, without being asked to. This is not weakness. This is the body doing exactly what it was built to do when the day has been given its due and the night is ready to receive you. And the beluga knows this process intimately. Sleep for a beluga is not the same as sleep for a land mammal. You cannot afford to lose consciousness entirely when you live in the ocean. The surface is always above you, and you always need to reach it. The pod is moving, and you need to stay with it. The environment is dynamic, and awareness, even a thin, resting awareness, is a survival tool. The beluga's body solved this problem long ago with a system that is elegant in its simplicity, so it sleeps one half of its brain at a time. The technical term is unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. One hemisphere of the brain enters a resting state, the slow, deep electrical patterns that characterize restorative sleep, while the other hemisphere remains active, monitoring the environment, maintaining basic body function, keeping the animal moving in slow, gentle loops near the surface. After a period of time, the hemispheres switch. The resting side wakes, the active side rests, and the beluga is never entirely asleep. It is also never entirely awake. It exists during these rest periods in a state that has no real human equivalent, conscious enough to breathe, move, and remain aware of its companions, while the deeper parts of the brain that need restoration are quietly getting what they need. Watch a resting beluga from above, and you see slow, wide circles traced in the water near the surface. The movements are minimal. To the body, moves only as much as is needed to stay near air. The head is often slightly elevated, keeping the blowhole within easy reach of the surface. The eyes may be partially open, the awake hemisphere keeping a dim, sufficient watch, or they may be closed entirely on one side while open on the other. The calls drop away almost entirely during these rest periods. The constant chatter of an active pod goes quiet. What remains are occasional, low-contact calls, the acoustic equivalent of a hand resting on a sleeping companion's shoulder. I am here. You are here. We are still together. The pod rests together. This is not coincidental. A group of animals resting at the same time, in the same slow pattern, makes each individual safer than it would be resting alone. The partially awake hemispheres of multiple animals provide a distributed watchfulness. The pod as a whole is more alert than any single member within it. Rest becomes a collective act, like everything else in beluga life. There is something unusually comforting about the idea of this kind of rest. Not the total surrender of consciousness that can feel to an anxious mind, like a kind of small loss of control, but a gentle dimming, a slowing, a state in which the essential things continue. Breathing, movement, the awareness of being among others, while the parts of the mind that have worked hard today are allowed to go quiet. You do not need to go entirely dark to rest. You do not need to solve everything before you are allowed to slow down. The beluga does not wait until the ocean is completely safe and predictable before it rests. The ocean is never completely safe and predictable. It rests anyway, in the middle of the world, with the water around it and the pod beside it. The body knows how to do this. Your body has been doing a version of it your whole life, every single night, getting better at it with practice, and the calls get quieter, the circles get slower, the water holds the white shapes as they turn in the dark. Let the ocean have you now. Let the thinking hemisphere keep its gentle watch. The rest of you can go. Not all belugas travel the same distances. The image of the beluga that most people carry is the migratory one. The animal covering thousands of miles, moving between vast open Arctic waters and distant summer estuaries, ranging across one of the largest and most remote ocean environments on the planet. And for many populations, this is accurate. These are wide-ranging animals with enormous home territories and migration routes that span the breadth of entire seas. But there are belugas who stay close. Several populations around the world occupy comparatively small ranges, spending their entire lives within a relatively limited stretch of coastal water, and the beluga population of the St. Lawrence River estuary in eastern Canada is perhaps the most famous of these. These animals live year-round in the same body of water, not the open Arctic, but a river estuary, enclosed, familiar, bounded. Their world is smaller in geography than their migratory cousins. And yet, in terms of depth of knowledge, their world may be richer. Because the resident beluga knows its small territory the way only long-term residents can know any place. So move prey into predictable positions at predictable times. This knowledge is not theoretical. It is embodied, accumulated over years of daily interaction with the same water, the same currents, the same seasonal rhythms of a single specific place. That there is a particular kind of intelligence that comes from staying, from going deep rather than far. The migratory beluga is extraordinary in its ability to navigate vast distances, to read the large-scale patterns of ocean and season, to maintain orientation across a journey that covers a significant fraction of the globe's circumference. This requires a broad, panoramic kind of awareness. But the resident beluga develops something different, a granular, intimate knowledge of one place, the knowledge of someone who has walked the same patch of ground every day for decades, and notices, without effort, the small changes that a casual visitor would never see. The St. Lawrence belugas have been studied more intensively than almost any other beluga population in the world, partly because of their accessibility and partly because their restricted range makes long-term individual tracking possible, in a way it is not for populations spread across the open Arctic. Researchers have followed individual animals for 20 years or more. They have documented the bonds within family units, the foraging patterns passed from mothers to calves, the way specific routes through the estuary are used by the same lineages across generations. What these studies reveal is a population that is, in a word, rooted. The knowledge of the estuary is distributed across the pod like a shared library, with different individuals having particular familiarity with different areas, different food sources, different shelter zones within the wider territory. No single animal knows everything. The pod together knows the place more completely than any individual member could alone. This is the gift of staying. When you remain in one place long enough, the place teaches you things it cannot teach a visitor. The seasonal patterns become readable in advance. The subtle environmental shifts that signal change become familiar enough to act on early, and the landscape stops being a backdrop and becomes something more like a partner, something that responds to you and that you, in turn, can read. There is also something in the smaller world of the resident beluga that feels, from a human perspective, deeply peaceful, not the absence of challenge. The St. Lawrence belugas face significant environmental pressures, and their population has declined sharply over the last century. But the quality of inhabiting a known world, of waking into a day whose basic contours are familiar, of moving through water that has been moved through before, in the company of animals you know well, toward places you have been before. The wide world is available. The migratory option has not been closed off by evolution. And yet, these belugas chose the known shore, the familiar current, the bounded and intimate world of a river they have made entirely their own. Sometimes, the whole of a life can live in a small place. Sometimes going deep is the longest journey there is. The beluga's family tree goes back further than almost any other creature you will encounter in your daily life. The ancestors of modern belugas were swimming in the world's oceans roughly 10 to 15 million years ago. To put that in perspective, the earliest recognizable human ancestors appeared around 5 to 7 million years ago. When the proto-beluga was already an established, evolving presence in the Miocene seas, the line that would eventually produce human beings had not yet separated from the line that would produce chimpanzees. We are, in a very literal sense, the younger species. The beluga was here first. The beluga belongs to a family called Monodontidae, a small ancient family of toothed whales that today contains only 2 living members, the beluga and the narwhal. These 2 animals are the sole survivors of a lineage that was once more diverse, with multiple species now known only from fossils. The beluga and narwhal are each other's closest living relatives, the last 2 branches of a tree that has been losing limbs for millions of years. The narwhal, with its single spiraling tusk that can grow to 3 meters in length, is perhaps the more dramatic of the 2. It has captured human imagination for centuries. The origin of unicorn mythology across multiple cultures, a creature so improbable looking that medieval Europeans who received narwhal horns through trade routes refused to believe the animal was real. But the beluga and the narwhal share deep common ground. They are both Arctic specialists. They both navigate sea ice. They are both intensely social. They diverged from a common ancestor millions of years ago and took different shapes, but the family resemblance in behavior and ecology remains clear. The beluga's lineage has survived things that ended most of the life on Earth that was alive at the same time as its ancestors. It survived the cooling of global temperatures that brought the ice ages. It survived the dramatic sea level changes that reshaped coastlines and altered ocean circulation patterns. It survived the extinction events, the climate swings, the planetary upheavals that erased countless other species from the fossil record. Each time the world changed drastically, the beluga adapted. The Arctic specialization that might look like a constraint is actually the product of a successful long-term bet. That cold, ice-covered water would continue to exist on this planet, and that an animal perfectly tuned to it would always have a home. For tens of millions of years, that bet has paid off. The fossil record of beluga ancestors shows animals that were, in many ways, already recognizably beluga-like. The body plan is ancient. The basic social structure, so inferred from fossil assemblages showing multiple individuals in the same deposit, appears to have deep roots. The acoustic complexity is harder to read in fossils, but the brain structures that support it were developing early. The animal we are talking about tonight is not a new design. It is an old design that has been refined and tested and proven across a stretch of time that is genuinely difficult to hold in the mind. There is a humility that comes from spending time with this fact. Most of what human beings have built, our cities, our languages, our institutions, our recorded history, fits within the last 10,000 years, which is a blink in biological time, a single day in the life of a species that has been around for 10 million years. The beluga has watched from the cold water as the ice sheets advanced and retreated, as the sea levels rose and fell, as the continents moved slowly but measurably into their current positions. It did not plan any of this. It did not know it was outlasting anything. It simply lived, generation by generation, in the way it was built to live, slowly, socially, closely tuned to the cold world around it. and the cold world kept being there. Endurance, it turns out, does not require drama. It requires a deep and patient fit between an animal and its world. The beluga has that fit. It has had it for longer than we can fully imagine, and it is still here. For thousands of years before scientists arrived with recording equipment and population surveys and Latin taxonomic names, the beluga was already known. The Inuit of northern Canada and Alaska, the Yupik peoples of the Bering Sea coast, the Inuvialuit of the western Arctic, the Chukchi of northeastern Russia, the various communities of the Greenlandic coast. These are peoples who built entire ways of life in the same Arctic environment the beluga calls home. And in doing so, they built relationships with the beluga that go deeper than any scientific study has yet managed to replicate. The Inuktitut word for beluga is kilalugak. In Yupik, it is tsetuat. These are not translations. They are original names, given by people who encountered this animal on its own terms, in its own environment, as part of their own world, not as a subject of study or a symbol of wildness, but as a neighbour, a presence that shared the same water, ate from the same ocean, moved through the same seasonal rhythms that governed human life in the Arctic. The beluga was hunted. This is important to say clearly and without apology. The hunt was real, physically dangerous, and essential to survival in an environment where plant-based food is scarce for most of the year. The beluga provided meat, fat, and the material for tools and clothing that could not be obtained elsewhere. The hunt shaped culture, ceremony, and community structure in ways that persist into the present. It was not incidental, it was central, but the relationship was not only extractive. Indigenous Arctic communities developed, over thousands of years of close observation, a knowledge of beluga behavior, ecology, and movement that in many cases surpasses what Western science documented in its first century of study. And they knew the migration routes and the timing of arrival at different locations with a precision that came from generation after generation of observation, tested against reality and passed forward through teaching. They knew which populations were distinct, which hunting grounds were more reliable in which seasons, which changes in ice or weather or prey, availability, signaled changes in beluga movement. This knowledge was not stored in books. It lived in people, and the ceremonies surrounding the beluga hunt in many Arctic communities reflect something about the relationship that goes beyond utility. The first beluga of the season, in many traditions, was not simply processed and consumed. It was received, thanked, offered water, because a sea animal, the tradition held, would be thirsty for fresh water after its life in the salt ocean. The bones were often returned to the sea so that the animal might be reborn. And the hunt was embedded in a framework of reciprocity and acknowledgement that recognized the beluga not as a resource, but as a being with its own existence, its own value, its own relationship to the world. These are not naive ideas. They are the conclusions of thousands of years of close relationship. The same conclusions that marine biologists are arriving at through very different methods. That belugas are complex, social, intelligent animals whose lives have meaning and whose deaths matter, and the ceremony simply got there first. What is remarkable is how much of what modern science has documented about beluga behavior was already known in these communities. The fidelity to birth sites, known to hunters who observed the same females returning to the same estuaries across generations. The complex social bonds, known to observers who had spent lifetimes watching pods in shallow summer waters, or the intelligence and vocal complexity, known to people who had listened to beluga calls through the hulls of their boats and the ice beneath their feet for generations before any recording device existed. Two very different ways of knowing arrived by different paths at the same remarkable animal. And both are looking at the same thing tonight. The same white shape in the dark water. The same songs filling the cold ocean. One tradition stretching back to the beginning of human presence in the Arctic. One that arrived more recently with instruments and papers and a vocabulary for what it was finding. Both stood at the edge of the cold water and felt something they could not entirely name. Both knew, without having to say it, that what they were looking at was worth protecting. Right now, somewhere beneath the Arctic Ocean, a beluga is singing, not performing, and not signaling danger or locating prey or navigating ice. Just singing, producing sounds that travel outward through the water in every direction, moving through the cold and the dark in long, curving waves that will eventually fade into the background hum of the ocean itself. The sound serves no single urgent purpose in this moment. It is simply the natural overflow of an animal that is alive and in company, and moving through a world it has been part of for millions of years. We spent time earlier in this story with the science of beluga vocalization, the mechanics of the melon, the click and echo of echolocation, the social whistles that function as names and greetings and location signals. All of that is true, and all of it is important. But there is a layer underneath the science that the science reaches toward without quite being able to touch. Some beluga vocalizations have no documented function. Researchers cataloguing the full acoustic range of beluga pods have identified calls and sequences that do not appear to serve echolocation, do not appear to be directed at specific individuals, do not appear to change based on environmental conditions or social context. They occur in calm conditions, in stable pods, when the animals are not foraging or navigating or interacting in any obviously purposeful way. They are sounds made, as far as anyone can determine, for the making of them. This is the part where scientists get cautious and careful, and start using words like possible, and may suggest, and cannot be ruled out. Because the idea that an animal makes sounds for no reason other than the making of them, for something like pleasure, or expression, or the simple satisfaction of adding a voice to the world, is a claim with large implications. It asks us to consider that the beluga's inner life might include something we would recognize if we saw it in a human being, as a creative impulse. But here is what we do know. The ocean is never empty of beluga sound where belugas are present. It is not a soundtrack that turns on for specific purposes and off when those purposes are met. It is continuous. Variable, yes. Louder and more complex during active social interaction. Softer and sparser during rest. Different in texture during migration than during foraging. But always there, as if the beluga's relationship to sound is not instrumental, but constitutive. As if sound is not something the beluga uses, but something the beluga is made of. There is a particular kind of listening that happens when you are underwater near a vocalizing beluga pod. The sound enters your body differently than sound in air. It bypasses the ear canal partly and conducts through the bones of your skull, arriving in the jaw and cheeks before the ear even processes it. You feel it before you hear it. The boundary between the sound and your body becomes uncertain for a moment, and in that moment of blurred edges, the distinction between you and the ocean seems slightly thinner than it usually does. People who have had this experience describe it consistently as one of the most unexpectedly emotional things that has ever happened to them. Not frightening, not overwhelming, something quieter, a feeling of having been included in something ancient for a moment, without being asked to do anything except be still and present. This is what a beluga pod sounds like from the inside. This is the sound the ocean makes when it contains these animals. And there is no scientific instrument that can measure the full weight of it, because the full weight of it is not a scientific question. It is a question about what it means to exist in a world that contains this much aliveness, this much unasked for beauty, this much sound, made by creatures who were here before us and who ask, in the making of it, for nothing. The song goes out in every direction. The water carries it as far as water can carry anything. Somewhere, miles away, another beluga hears it and answers. The ocean fills up a little more. We have come a long way tonight. We started at the surface of a dark Arctic ocean, watching a pale shape move through the water below. And from that first glimpse, we went deeper, into the biology and the songs, into the forehead that listens and the neck that turns to look at you, into the dive that slows the heart and the pod that makes the dark navigable, and the songs carried forward across generations, like something too important to lose, into the ice that seals the world overhead and the patience required to keep finding air. And now we are here, at the end of the story and the beginning of sleep, which is, in its way, the same place. The beluga is out there right now, not in a metaphor, not in an imagined ocean conjured for this narrative, literally, physically, in the water at this moment as you read this, in the Beaufort Sea, the Bering Sea, the St. Lawrence Estuary, the bays of Hudson, the waters around Svalbard, white shapes in dark water, melon-domed foreheads tilted downward, songs going out in every direction for 10 million years and counting, calves pressed close to their mothers, older females holding the map of the world in their bodies, like a gift they didn't know they were carrying. None of them know you exist. None of them know tonight you learned their story. But the ocean connects you to them in a way that doesn't require awareness from either side. You breathe air that has been over Arctic water. The water you drank today has, at some point in its billions of years old journey through the water cycle, moved past the same coastlines those belugas swim. You are part of the same physical world, the same long, patient, astonishingly alive planet. And tonight, like the beluga in its resting circles, so you are going to slow down. The heart is already quieter than it was when this story began. The breathing has found a steadier rhythm. The body has been here before. Thousands of nights of descent into sleep. The same reliable sequence of letting go. The same arrival at a place where the things that felt urgent are briefly and mercifully silent. You don't have to go entirely dark. Like the beluga, you can rest while something in you stays gently aware. You don't have to solve anything before you're allowed to sleep. The water will still be there when you surface. The morning will come whether or not you spend tonight in preparation for it. The beluga doesn't wait for a perfect ocean before it rests. It rests in the real one, in the dark and the cold and the constant uncertainty, surrounded by the sounds of the pod and the low, familiar notes of water moving past ice. It trusts that it has what it needs. It trusts the pod. It trusts the surface above. It lets the brain go quiet in the way that brains, given the chance, have always known how to go quiet. Let your ocean go quiet now. The day has been long enough. You have done enough. The things that remain undone will still be there to be done when you surface, and you will meet them better rested than you would meet them exhausted. This is not a compromise. This is wisdom. The beluga knows it. The Arctic knows it. The deep water and the slow ice and the 10 million year lineage of an animal that has never once stayed awake, worrying about tomorrow, know it. Sleep is not time lost. It is the thing that makes the rest of the time worth something. Close your eyes. Let the pod move around you. Let the water hold you. If this story helped you rest tonight, the very best thing you can do is hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because we are here every single night with a new world to disappear into. Tomorrow we go somewhere just as extraordinary as the Arctic, somewhere just as full of quiet, ancient, impossible wonder. You don't want to miss it, and if you're already subscribed, thank you. You already know what's waiting. The ocean is enormous, but tonight it is all yours. Sleep well.